Yeah. The Germans have been experimenting with the Soviet Russians out in Kazan, and they've been doing experiments with what they might like should they be allowed to build a tank. Panzer I, Panzer IIs are really in essence the training tanks for the German military, even though Panzer IIs are built very much with the idea they might be used in combat. Panzer IIIs, so this one started off with not that much in the way of armour on the front. We've got there our particular version, the L version that you can see. It's got an extra 20mm armour plate fitted across the front, just so you can see where the driver's cut out, where he's looking. So that thickens the armour there. So you've really now got about 50mm of frontal armour to protect it. So each time they're coming out with a new model, they're either thickening up the armour or increasing the firepower. The early models of these had a 37mm, the standard anti-tank gun fitted. This is now, we've souped that up. It was made in Poland after World War II. So huge numbers are made by the Russians during the war. It is considered by many a very successful tank, but also, if you're honest about it, it's also the tank that was knocked out the most in World War II. So large numbers of these are knocked out by German anti-tank guns, by mines, by other German tanks. The simple fact was the Russians could make so many more of them, and their genius was really in simplifying the production. So they cheapened the cost of making a T-34 as the war goes on. They simplify production because they have to move the factories away from the advancing German army. There's a point where some of these T-34s are almost leaving the factory without any seats in them. If you're the driver, you need a seat, fold up your greatcoat and sit on that. They simplify that design just so they can get more aboard them to the troops. On average, they estimated a T-34-85 would probably be in combat for about 2 months before it either is knocked out or simply breaks down. But don't worry, chaps, here's another one to replace it. Vehicle, but even though lots of times, if you watch the documentaries, everyone will say, well, it wasn't very good, was it? It didn't really stand up to Western tanks like the Sherman that much in the Pacific War. Actually, this was a very advanced design when it comes into service, and it's also one of those vehicles that, again, if it's not got anything much to fight against in terms of other armour, actually, if you're the guy with a tank, it doesn't matter what tank, you're still the guy with the advantage. And that's exactly what the case was for the Japanese military early on in the war, out in places like British, after American Civil War generals. So this one's named after Jeb Stuart and was used from, again, by the British forces from the end of 1941. Now you can look at this vehicle, it's an early model, you can tell it's an M3 lines doing the damage, but we're also going to have to break into those enemy lines first, like the First World War. And that means we're going to need what the British then decide to call infantry tanks. We start with the Matilda 1, and then we go on to this fellow, the A12, the Matilda 2. And remarkably, we always criticise British tank design so often, this is built relatively quickly and very successfully by Woolwich Arsenal does the designs, they hand it over to a company, again in the 1930s, they're trying to build up a base of a number of different manufacturers, because traditionally it's only vickers building tanks in Britain. If a war's coming, we're going to need more people to build them. So we go to the Vulcan foundry and they build this and get it out really, again, very quickly within a couple of years. Now, with the Matilda II, because it was going to put into the M4, really the M3 is like a testbed tank in many ways. They haven't got the turret worked out. It's the M4 Sherman that they want to build, and they do build in large quantities. Now, this particular Sherman, it's an M4A2E8. So what does all that mean? M4 is the standardised model. A2 means it's got the General Motors 12-cylinder twin diesel in the back, and E8 means it's got horizontal balloon spring suspension, HVSS suspension. Easy 8 suspension is the way they tended to call this. And quite often, if you're reading all this, how they take it all apart, they then say brackets 76, and that Now that twin diesel in the back powers through a drive shaft to the front where the gearbox is, and yet again you can see it's those sprocketed wheels in the front that are being driven by the engine, the only one. The wheels on the ground with that HVSS suspension system, they're just taking the weight of the vehicle, spreading it out over the track. The wheel at the rear is the one that's actually keeping that wider track nice and tight. And again, throughout the Sherman production, and yet again, a bit like the T-34-85, it isn't tank for tank, a match or anything like the Tiger, but it wasn't meant to be. This is a tank that was limited to 30 tons because they were going to have to ship it around the world. They knew, again, they wanted a reliable vehicle, and they certainly got that with the Sherman. They knew the design was incorporating firepower, not to fight other tanks, because this was a tank for exploitation. You had other vehicles called tank destroyers for taking on tanks. Now we know, really in World War II that didn't work out for the Americans, so tanks did fight other tanks all the time, and therefore we get these sort of balls that was made in such large numbers, worked very, very well for American forces. Now this one has got the multi-bank engine in the back, the Chrysler 4 version of the Sherman, because of that engine type it's got in the back. It's got a welded front hull, that cast turret, and again that 75mm gun, 5-man crew, and when these vehicles go into service, what happens with them is very quickly they do upgrade programs on them. And one of the issues the Sherman is famous for was they thought they were having engine fires. In fact, it wasn't engine fires, ammunition was setting on fire when they were penetrating. So to protect where the ammunition was stored, and that was what was causing the fires, they weld extra plates of armour on the side. You can see that this tank has gone through the upgrade programme, storing the cordite or whatever the bank charge is that's going to force the metal round out the end of the barrel. I mentioned earlier about the two. That gun, firing armour-piercing, discarding sabot rounds, has got more armour penetration capability than the gun on the famous German Panther tank. So it's a very effective gun they put on the vehicle. And it got speed with that 600 horsepower engine, good armour protection. They start issuing it to the troops. British tank units start training with this around Brussels in the late autumn and winter of going to action with a vehicle they weren't familiar with. So they took them away, reissued them with Shermans, and only issue these earlier in 1945 when they think it's safe to do so. So comet tanks in British forces only see fighting really from March 1945 to the end of the war, really the Rhine crossing onwards. But a very successful tank, was sold around the world. Burma had them in service till mid-1980s, Finland had them, the Irish Army had some, so again, cracking bit of kit, a bit late from the British Army's point of view coming into service. The engine though, by the way, they gave up putting a silencer on the back of this vehicle. It's just got fishtail exhaust on the rear. No point trying to silence it, you're going to hear this thing coming from miles away. So let's just use that engine though as a bit of a threat rather than trying to put a silencer on there. And it does have a lovely, lovely gurgly sound to it, doesn't it? That whopping great meter in the back. Now the next tank we're going to bring on for you, we're going to jump to a post-war era. This is one of the versions that was built by the Chinese. In Chinese service it's called a Type 59. And so I don't forget that, they've actually put T, if you look on the side, Type 59 is on the side of the turret, just gives us a bit of a clue there. Now the Chinese copies of the Russian Bundeswehr, the West German Army, was formed again to help NATO defend the West. They used American equipment to start with and then designed this, the Leopard tank. Now what we've actually got in front of you here, the Leopard 1 tank was sold on by Germany to many countries. And this particular one, you may be able to notice on the side of the turret, there's a maple leaf. That's because this served with the Canadian forces. And Canada, in the early 2000s, decided tanks were old hat, we don't need them anymore, and went to get rid of them. We put our hand up and said, can we have a couple please? And they really kindly gave us 2 of their Leopard tanks. This is one of them. Then Canada went off to fight in Afghanistan, and very quickly realised they dropped a big one and went back to Germany and bought more Leopard tanks and put them into service. Just like the Netherlands have, they got rid of their tanks and now they're hiring Leopard tanks again, back off and training with the German military. So. So the original design of the Leopard, the armour protection on the front was supposed to be proof against 20mm, about cannon fire. Don't worry about that, chaps, we're going to make you so fast on the battlefield. We're going to give you a thumping great MTU diesel engine, that's what you can hear rumbling away there. We're going to make you so quick the enemy won't be able to keep up with you to knock you out. That was the argument with the Leopard. Complete opposite of World War II and the Tiger. The Tiger has a powerful gun, same as the Leopard, but it has very thick armour and perhaps, some might argue, not great mobility. The Leopard has gone for that powerful gun, but great mobility, don't worry about the armour. That was the idea. And the Leopard, really, their design was very successful because they kept up the mobility, but also added armour over time. First one there, that's the T-72 tank. Very low profile, 125mm gun, and it looked like we're following on with our Challenger 1 tank behind it. Now with this tank, the Soviets have got what they call an auto-loader. They get rid of the guy who has to stand there. You can see on the back of this T-72 what looked like a tube on the back of the turret. That's a snorkel, because the Russians realised that NATO would blow up all the bridges over the Rhine, the Neva Rhine, the Wal, all the rivers that go north into the North Sea and the Channel. How are they going to cross those rivers? This is a tank that they train to deep wave. They can put a snorkel on the back of it and they go under the river, through the riverbed and out the other side. It's a tank as well that it was made in Russia. It wasn't supposed to be made. It was supposed to be only made if they went to war. But there was a fight between two rival tank factories. T-64 tank had problems with it. It was expensive. It was complex. So in the end, somehow they managed to get the rival tank, the T-72, into production. And of course, it's sold around the world as well. So again, lots of these were sold into the Middle East. Now, the British Army's philosophy after World War II was we are never going to war again with a tank that has less firepower and less armour protecting than the enemy. That was one of the lessons we learned from the Tiger and the Panther, and later the King Tiger in World War II. So, British tanks, we have the Centurion, which is really a World War II tank. We have the Chieftain, massively thick armour, huge 120mm gun. We were going to have a tank called MBT-80. The project was cancelled. The Shah of Iran had ordered a tank from Britain. He was deposed, so we took over that project. And that project becomes this tank, Challenger 1. So in fact, it's got still holds the record for the longest tank-on-tank kill. Came from a Challenger 1. I can't remember, one of you out there will shout it out how long it actually was, but it was a very successful bit of kit that way. Challenger 1 replaced by Challenger 2, the modern British Army's tank, and fairly soon they're going to start the upgrade programme to put a new gun, new turret on Challenger 2 to make it Challenger 3. Right, so there's a pretty impressive range of tanks in the arena. What we're going to do for you now, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to restart the Tiger. And the Tiger tank, we're going to do it by the method that the German crews sometimes did.
This is not for the faint-hearted, I assure you. Right, okay, try it at that. Brilliant. Also, during World War II, most of the German tank crews were fairly small men, so it did have a little bit of extra effort on them, I think. Anyway, I'll hand back to David. Thank you.
Either one,